When people speak about America's greatness, the strength of its economy, the rise of its industries, and the boldness of its democracy, they rarely mention the millions of backs that bore its weight. From the earliest days of the colonies, enslaved Africans were not just a part of the story, they were the foundation. From Virginia's tobacco fields to the rice plantations of South Carolina, black bodies were forced into endless labor, their sweat and suffering turning the gears of America's rise. This wasn't a Southern issue alone. The North profited too, from cotton mills in Massachusetts to banks and shipping companies in New York that insured and financed the trade in human flesh. The transatlantic slave trade was a system of brutality that crossed oceans. Africans were captured, marched for miles, chained to forts, and crammed into ships where many died before ever reaching land. Those who survived the Middle Passage were sold at auction blocks, mothers pulled from children, husbands from wives, names stripped away, humanity denied. Slavery in America was chattel slavery, a system where people were considered property for life, their children born into bondage. There was no upward path, no freedom for good behavior, only endless work, violence, and control. And the system was legal, structured, protected. The Constitution of the United States, the very document that proclaimed liberty and justice, contained within it the 3/5 compromise, reducing enslaved individuals to a fraction of a person for representation purposes, without granting them any actual rights. The law didn't ignore slavery, it built protections around it. Even the Founding Fathers, often held up as icons of freedom, were deeply entangled in this brutal system. George Washington enslaved over 100 people. Thomas Jefferson wrote about equality while owning over 600 souls. He even fathered children with Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman he owned, a relationship that cannot be separated from the imbalance of power. Yet enslaved Africans were not passive. They resisted in countless ways. Some fled following the North Star or secret signals stitched into quilts and whispered in spiritual songs. Others revolted like Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, and Nat Turner, who led uprisings that terrified the ruling class and resulted in bloody crackdowns. Even within the plantations, resistance lived in subtle acts, learning to read in secret, breaking tools, slowing work, preserving language, and keeping African culture alive under the gaze of overseers. The Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 is often celebrated as the moment slavery ended. But in reality, it only freed enslaved people in the Confederate States still at war. Slavery persisted in Union states until the 13th Amendment in 1865, and even then, the clause, except as punishment for a crime, opened the door for mass incarceration to take its place. After slavery came sharecropping, black codes, and Jim Crow laws, new chains in the form of law and poverty. America's prosperity was not simply built through innovation and independence. It was built on the backs of people who were stripped of both. And yet, through all of it, black people not only survived, they created. They endured. They resisted. They dreamed. This truth is not about shame. It's about recognition. Because when we erase the horrors of slavery, we erase the strength it took to survive it. History remembers the comfortable heroes, the ones with perfect speeches and polished legacies. But what about the ones they tried to erase? The fighters, rebels, and visionaries who dared to defy the system and pay the price for it? The story of America's resistance isn't just found in Boston tea crates or in polished marble monuments. It's found in the shadows of slave cabins, the forests of the Underground Railroad, and the heartbeats of warriors who were never invited into the history books. Let's start with Nat Turner, an enslaved preacher who led a rebellion in Virginia in 1831. He believed he was chosen by God to strike down the system of slavery. Alongside a small group of followers, he launched one of the most impactful revolts in American history. The backlash was severe. Hundreds of innocent black people were killed in retaliation. Turner himself was captured, tried, and executed, but his legacy became a whispered warning and a powerful symbol. Then there's Harriet Jacobs, whose story is rarely told beside Frederick Douglass's. She was a woman who wrote one of the earliest narratives of slavery from a female perspective. Her book, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, spoke of abuse, motherhood, and the pain of hiding in an attic for 7 years to protect her children. Phyllis Wheatley, enslaved in Boston, became the first African-American woman to publish a book of poetry in 1773 at a time when most black people were legally forbidden to read. Indigenous resistance is another erased chapter. Tecumseh, a Shawnee leader, built a powerful alliance of tribes to fight the westward expansion of settlers. He warned, "Sell a country. Why not sell the air, the clouds, and the great sea?" His words ring out as prophecy today. Geronimo, a fearless Apache leader, fought U.S. and Mexican forces for years, eluding capture, defending his people, and refusing to bow to colonial power. But today, many Americans only know his name from parachute jokes and army slogans. Even during the Civil Rights era, many names were sidelined. Claudette Colvin was a 15-year-old who refused to give up her bus seat months before Rosa Parks, but she was poor, dark-skinned, and pregnant. So civil rights leaders feared she wouldn't be accepted as the right face of the movement. Ida B. Wells spent her life exposing the horror of lynching, traveling the South, collecting names, and daring to publish truths many feared to speak. Why were these stories hidden? Because resistance isn't always neat. It's not always media-friendly. It's messy, complicated, and raw. And yet, it's the very thing that made progress possible. These were not side characters. These were central figures in the story of liberation, whether the textbooks admitted it or not. The roots of America are soaked in sacrifice, not of the powerful, but of the powerless. To wear history like a crown, we must first acknowledge the cost of its gold. Subscribe to our page for the final part of this documentary.